What if the safest place to kill someone was inside a crowd of 200,000 people, all of them praying, all of them facing the same direction, all of them completely blind to the man standing 17 meters behind their target? Not a battlefield, not a back alley, not a deserted road at midnight, a prayer ground, the holiest morning of the Islamic calendar, Eid Al-Fitr, Karachi, Pakistan. The sun barely up, the air still cool, 200,000 men shoulder to shoulder in rows so perfect they look like they were drawn by hand. This is where one of the most audacious intelligence operations in modern history was completed. Not with an airstrike, not with a drone, with patience, with 3 years of a lie so total, so lived in, so carefully constructed, that the man telling it sometimes forgot it was a lie at all. But we're not starting there. We're starting 4 years earlier, in a shipping container, on a cargo vessel somewhere between Dubai and Tripoli, because that is where this story actually begins. Not with a bullet, with a name, half a name, buried in a document that almost nobody read. In the summer of 2001, an analyst inside Unit 8200, Israel's Signals Intelligence Directorate, was working through a batch of intercepted shipping manifests flagged for secondary review. Most of them were noise. Routing documents, customs declarations, nothing that meant anything on its own. One was different. It was a manifest for a cargo consignment routed through Dubai. On its face, it was machine parts, industrial equipment, the kind of thing that moves through Dubai's port every 6 minutes and nobody ever looks at twice. But buried in the secondary documentation, a technical verification appendix that most analysts would have skipped, was a reference number. And attached to that reference number, a designation, technical consultant, confirmed. KH Karachi, 2 initials, 1 city, and a role that, in the context of what the manifest was actually carrying, meant something very specific. The consignment was not machine parts, it was centrifuge components, the kind used in uranium enrichment. The technical consultant, whoever KH was, had signed off on the design validity, not the shipping, not the sale, the science. He had looked at the blueprints and told someone, "This works. You can give this to your buyer and it will function." Without that sign-off, the transaction was theory. With it, it was a weapons program. The analyst flagged it. The flag moved up the chain. By the time it reached a senior case officer, a man referred to in this account only as Lev, it had been cross-referenced against 3 separate intercepts from Dubai, 2 of which referenced a Pakistani physicist using the codename the Professor. Lev read the file once, then he read it again. Then he wrote a single-line assessment. If this individual is real, and if these intercepts connect to a state-level buyer, we are not looking at a network facilitator. We are looking at the scientific cornerstone of the most dangerous proliferation operation since 1945. The file was elevated to the highest classification level available, and the hunt for KH began. Finding a man with 2 initials in a city of 15 million is not a search problem. It is a patience problem. Lev's team worked the intercepts for 6 weeks. They cross-referenced every Pakistani physicist with the initials KEH who had any documented connection to the metallurgical or nuclear engineering sectors in Karachi. They produced a list of 11 names. Through a combination of surveillance, signals, and one very carefully placed inquiry through a third-country liaison service, they reduced the list to 3, then 2, then 1. Dr. Karim Hussein, 53 years old, tenured academic at a Karachi Technical Institute, published researcher in materials science, married, 2 adult children, 1 in Canada, 1 in Lahore, clean public record, no travel to sanctioned countries on any passport that could be located, and no, by any standard investigative measure, connection to nuclear weapons whatsoever, which was either proof that he was innocent or proof that whoever was protecting him was extraordinarily good at their job. Lev's assessment did not move. He wrote, "The absence of a traceable connection is itself a data point, but an assessment, no matter how confident, is not evidence, and without evidence there was no operation. There was only a name, a file, and a question that had no answer yet." Lev needed a defector. He got one. 4 months after the initial intercept, a logistics coordinator for the Khan network was quietly extracted from Kuala Lumpur. His name in this account is Tariq. Tariq was not a scientist. He was not a handler. He was a man who drove cars, booked hotel rooms, and occasionally transported people between private airstrips and meeting locations in Dubai, Malaysia, and once, he remembered this specifically, a rented villa outside Karachi. During 3 days of debriefing in a safe house in Cyprus, Tariq was shown 87 photographs. He was told nothing about any of them. He was simply asked, for each one, "Have you seen this person?" He said yes to 6. On photograph 61, he paused longer than he had paused on any of the others. 11 seconds. The debrief recording, reviewed later, captured the exact duration. Then he said, "This is the professor. I drove him twice. Dubai, then Karachi. He never spoke to me. I don't know his name. We called him the professor." Photograph 61 was Dr. Karim Hussein. Tariq's identification was one man's visual memory of a face seen twice, years earlier, under conditions designed to prevent exactly this kind of recall. It would not survive a court. It could not be used in any formal proceeding. But Lev wasn't building a case for a court. He wrote in his assessment, "We have a signal intercept, 3 cross-referencing communications, and a direct identification from a network insider. This is sufficient. The operation was elevated. A planning cell was formed. And then Lev said the thing that would define the next 3 years, we cannot reach him. Not through conventional means. ISI has this man wrapped. If we move on him directly, in his home, in his office, at his institute, the operation burns before it begins, and we lose every asset in the region. We need to wait for the one moment he is unprotected." The planning cell spent 11 weeks mapping Dr. Karim Hussein's life. His routine, his travel, his family contact patterns, his medical appointments, his habits. And then, buried in a surveillance report filed by a local source in Karachi, one line that changed everything. Subject attends the Eid Al-Fitr open-air prayer at the main ground every year. Arrives alone. No visible security. Returns home on foot with the crowd. Duration of public exposure approximately 3 hours. Alone. No security every single year. 200,000 people. One morning, one window. Lev closed the report. He already knew what the operation would look like. What he did not know yet, what nobody in that planning cell could have known, was the cost of the man they were about to send into that crowd to confirm it. His name in this account is Rami, and he had no idea that the identity he was about to spend 3 years building, the name, the accent, the prayers, the handshakes, the invoices, the friendships, would not be something he could simply take off when the operation was over. Some covers you step out of, others step inside you. And here is the question that the file never answered, and that Lev never asked out loud, and that the planning cell never put on paper. What happens to the man who has to become someone else, completely, convincingly for years, inside one of the most surveilled cities in the world? What does he bring back with him? And what does he leave behind that can never be retrieved? Rami was 34 years old when he received the briefing. He was not the first choice. The first choice had been a more senior operative with deeper Urdu fluency and prior experience in South Asia. That operative had been pulled 3 weeks before the assignment was finalized, reassigned to a different operation in a different country, for reasons that were never shared with the Karachi planning cell. Rami was the second choice. He knew this. He was told this directly, which was unusual. Intelligence services rarely volunteer such information to their operatives. Lev told him anyway. He said it was because honesty about the circumstances of selection was more useful than false confidence. What he did not say was that the first choice's withdrawal had made him nervous, and nervous case officers sometimes overcorrect toward transparency. Rami had 14 months of deep cover experience in Dubai under a Lebanese textile buyer legend. His Urdu was rated functional under low stress conditions. His Arabic was native level. His prayer practice was assessed as convincing to a non-specialist observer. The qualification notes in his assignment file contained one flagged concern, buried in the third paragraph. Subject demonstrates above average psychological investment in cover identities. Monitor for boundary maintenance. Nobody explained what that meant in practical terms. Nobody followed up on it. The legend built for Karachi was called Faris Haddad, Lebanese-born, 41 years old, 7 years older than Rami's actual age, which required physical adjustment. Dubai-based textile buyer, employed by a mid-tier fabric export company that had operated as a Mossad front for 7 years. The company had real offices, real clients, real invoices, and a staff who would answer verification calls correctly. Faris Haddad had a history, a fabricated Lebanese childhood with real geographic specificity. The streets were real, the schools were real, the football team he supported was real. He had a mild heart condition that required medication, a prop, but also a reason to carry a bag, to pause, to behave slightly differently from the men around him in ways that could be attributed to health rather than anxiety. He had an ex-wife in Beirut whose name Rami memorized and whose backstory he could narrate for 40 minutes without repetition. Rami spent 14 months becoming Faris Haddad in Dubai before he ever set foot in Karachi. Not rehearsing, becoming. He attended industry meetings as Faris. He argued about shipping rates as Faris. He ate breakfast as Faris. He attended Friday prayers regularly, unremarkably, as Faris. By the time he boarded a flight to Karachi for the first Eid observation, a colleague at the Dubai textile company, a real person, an actual employee who did not know what the company was, had known Faris for over a year and would have described him as a quiet, slightly melancholic man who knew a great deal about Egyptian cotton and very little about cricket. That colleague's name was Omar. He was 26. He had invited Faris to his wedding. Faris had attended. The first Karachi observation is already in the record. What the record does not contain is what Rami reported in his private debrief notes, the ones filed separately from the operational assessment, the ones that went only to Lev. He wrote, "The prayer felt real. I don't mean I believe. I mean, something in the body responds to that scale of collective devotion, regardless of what the mind holds. I need you to know I maintained operational discipline throughout. But I also need you to know that 40 minutes inside a space like that, surrounded by 200,000 people engaged in something genuine, it does something to the cover story. Not to the mission, to the story." Lev read the note. He filed it without response. This was the first fracture. Small. Invisible to everyone except the man writing the note and the man reading it. But fractures do not announce themselves. They accumulate. Between the first and second observation year, 3 things happened that the planning cell knew about. The ISI low-level review of foreign nationals at public gatherings, which had swept up Faris Haddad's identity and then released it after cover verification, was one of them. The second was a signals intercept suggesting that Dr. Karim Hussein had been approached regarding a new buyer. Not Libya, not Iran. A third state. The intercept was partial, a fragment, not a confirmation, but it changed the operation's internal urgency from patient to pressured. The third thing was Rami. 6 months after the first observation, he filed a request for a 48-hour cover suspension, a protocol that allows operatives under long-term legend to briefly step outside the identity under controlled conditions for psychological maintenance. The request was standard. The protocol existed for exactly this reason. Lev denied it. His reasoning, written in a one-line memo, cover suspension at this stage risks identity drift ahead of Phase 2, maintain full legend continuity. Rami acknowledged the denial. He did not file another request. What he did instead, and this was discovered much later, not during the operation but after it, was call Omar from Dubai, his colleague, the man whose wedding he had attended as Faris Haddad. He called him as Faris. He spoke as Faris. They talked for 22 minutes about nothing important: a fabric shipment, a mutual contact in Cairo, Omar's wife's pregnancy. Rami was not breaking cover. He was, technically, maintaining it, but maintaining a cover by inhabiting it voluntarily, outside of operational necessity, in a phone call to a friend who did not know the friend was fictional. That is not maintenance. That is something else. The second Eid observation, 2002. Rami entered the prayer ground on a revised identity. The Lebanese buyer legend had been retired after Lev detected the ISI inquiry through a source. The new cover was a Pakistani Emirati businessman returning from an extended stay in Kuala Lumpur. New passport, new name, new employment history. Same face, new beard, 4 kilograms heavier. Hussein was present. Same section, same row, same position. The pattern was confirmed. The operation was proceeding exactly as designed. And then, during the debrief following the second observation, Yosef, the secondary operative, positioned near the southern gate, filed a note that Lev did not share with Rami. Yosef had observed, from his gate position, the same heavy-set older man who had spoken to Rami in 2001. The man was present again in 2002, standing near the southern perimeter, not praying in the main body of the crowd, watching the exits. Yosef's note read, "Subject does not match general crowd behavior. Positioning is observational, not devotional. Unknown. Whether this is habitual personal behavior, informal security, or something else. Recommend flagging for 2003 assessment." Lev read the note. He did not flag it for 2003. He did not tell Rami. His reasoning, reconstructed later from internal communications, was that the retired officer, if that is what the man was, had already been given 2 opportunities to act and had not acted. Either he was not a threat, or he was a threat who was choosing not to engage. In either case, the operational calculus did not change. The window was Eid, the target was Hussein. The retired man was an unknown variable in a plan that had already absorbed one unknown variable, the ISI inquiry, and survived it. Lev made a decision. He decided the man was not a problem. This was the assumption that Phase 1 had never examined, that the operatives were the only ones watching, that the only surveillance in play was the surveillance they knew about, that 2 years of careful observation had not itself been observed. It was a reasonable assumption. It was wrong. During the abort discussion, held in the 6 weeks before the 2003 Eid, when the operation was finalized, one member of the planning cell raised the question directly. She was the operational psychologist assigned to the cell. Her role was to assess operative readiness, cover stability, and extraction risk. She had read every debrief note filed by both Rami and Yosef over 2 years. She said, in the planning cell meeting, "I want to put something on the table that is not in any of the operational files. Rami has been Faris Haddad, in total cumulative time, for longer than some operatives spend in their entire careers. He has relationships inside that cover. He has an emotional investment in that cover that goes beyond professional functionality. I am not saying he cannot perform. I am saying we do not fully know who he will be on the other side of this operation, and I think we should discuss that before we send him in for the final phase." There was a silence in the room. Lev said, "Are you recommending abort?" She said, "I am recommending that we ask whether the cost of completion has been fully calculated." Lev said, "The cost of not completing is a third state acquiring functional centrifuge design validation from the only man in South Asia qualified to provide it. That cost has also been calculated." The discussion ended. Rami was confirmed for the 2003 operation. He was not told about the abort discussion. He was not told about Yosef's note regarding the older man at the southern gate. He was not told that the operational psychologist had flagged his cover investment as a long-term risk rather than an asset. He flew to Karachi 3 weeks later with a clean passport, a new name, and a prayer mat he had carried since Dubai. And somewhere in the city he was flying into, a retired intelligence officer, a man who had spent 30 years reading crowds the way other men read books, was deciding whether to come back to the prayer ground one more time. Whether the face he had seen twice was worth a third look. Whether his instinct, after all these years, still meant anything. He had not yet decided. Neither had the operation. The morning of Eid Al-Fitr, 2003. Rami arrived at the prayer ground at 5:38 a.m. The sun was not yet fully up. The sky over Karachi was the specific shade of gray-pink that happens in coastal cities in the hour before heat establishes itself. Street vendors were already working the perimeter roads. Families moved in streams toward the ground from every direction. Children in new clothes, old men with prayer mats rolled under their arms. He had been in Karachi for 19 days under the new identity, long enough to establish a pattern at the hotel, long enough to have 2 verifiable business meetings, real meetings, with real fabric suppliers that would appear in any review of his movements, long enough to have eaten at the same restaurant 4 times and been recognized by the waiter. 19 days of being a person he had never been before, in a city that had already seen 2 versions of him, neither of which had left a clean record. The false start happened before he even reached the prayer ground. At the Eastern Access Road, one of 3 main pedestrian channels feeding into the ground, a uniformed officer was conducting spot identity checks. Not systematic, random. The kind of thing that happens at large public gatherings and means nothing most of the time. Rami saw the checkpoint from 40 meters. He had 3 seconds to make a decision. His documents were clean. The cover was solid. There was no operational reason to avoid the checkpoint. Avoiding it would create more suspicion than passing through it. He knew this. The logic was clear. He stopped walking anyway, not a full stop. A hesitation. 4 seconds where his body slowed and his mind ran the scenario forward and found, at the end of it, not a rational risk assessment, but something older and less manageable. The specific fear that comes not from knowing a cover is weak, but from knowing it is strong and still not being certain that strong is enough. He kept walking. He passed through the checkpoint. The officer looked at his documents, looked at his face, handed the documents back, and waved him through without a word. Rami filed this moment in his mind as nothing happened. That was not entirely accurate. Something happened, he had hesitated, and hesitation at a checkpoint is the one physical tell that no amount of training fully suppresses. The officer had not noticed, but hesitation noticed by no one is still hesitation. It meant his threshold had shifted. 2 years ago, he would not have slowed. He noted it. He kept moving. At 6:40 a.m., Rami was inside the prayer ground, positioned in the northern central section. Yosef had entered 40 minutes earlier through the western access and was already near the southern gate perimeter, beginning his crowd density mapping. Hussein arrived at 6:52 a.m., same section. 3rd row from the front, left of center. He unrolled his mat, greeted the man beside him with a brief nod, and sat. The identification was confirmed inside 90 seconds. The signal to Yosef, a specific adjustment of the prayer cap, executed during the pre-prayer settling period, was given at 6:58 a.m. The operation was live. For the next 90 minutes, nothing happened. This was always the hardest part. Not the approach, not the execution, but the waiting inside the act of prayer, which cannot be rushed or skipped without becoming visible. 200,000 men praying in synchronized movement, and inside that movement, 2 men who were praying toward a different outcome. At some point during the prayer, Rami could not identify exactly when. He became aware that his breathing had stabilized. Not tactically. Not because he had controlled it, because the prayer itself had settled it, the same way it had in 2001, the same way his debrief note had tried and failed to fully describe. He did not examine this. He filed it away. He stayed on the target's position. Hussein prayed with complete calm. He did not look around. He did not check his phone. He was, by every observable measure, a man at peace on the holiest morning of his year. Rami noted this without judgment. He noted it, and he kept noting it, and then the prayers ended. The near abort came 11 minutes after prayers concluded. The crowd was rising, compressing, beginning to move toward the exits in the slow-motion surge that happens when a body of that size transitions from stillness to movement. Rami had begun his tracking approach, 17 meters behind Hussein, closing gradually with the crowd's natural forward momentum. Then Hussein stopped. Not a hesitation. A full stop. He stepped slightly to his left out of the direct flow of the crowd and looked back. Not toward Rami specifically, but in the general direction of the central section, scanning. His hand went to his pocket. He withdrew a phone. He looked at the screen for approximately 8 seconds. Then he put the phone away. Then he stood still for another 4 seconds. 4 seconds in a moving crowd is not 4 seconds. It is a restructuring of every calculation built over 2 years. Rami was now 14 meters away and closing, because the crowd behind him had no knowledge of the stop and was not slowing. The gap was compressing faster than the plan allowed. The crowd geometry, which had been modeled on continuous forward movement by all parties, was now wrong. Yosef, at the southern gate, could not see any of this. His sight line was blocked by the crowd density in the intermediate section. Rami had no signal option that would reach Yosef in time to be useful. He had 3 choices: abort and divert left into the crowd's lateral channel, reducing his approach angle and abandoning the operation entirely. Continue and accept that he was now inside the minimum safe trailing distance, or slow, which in a compressing crowd meant either stopping entirely, which was conspicuous, or accepting a lateral push that would take him off the Hussein axis. He continued, not because it was the correct tactical choice. He would acknowledge this later. He continued because 2 years of this, 2 years of Faris Haddad, 2 years of Dubai and Karachi and praying in crowds and carrying a fictional heart condition and attending a colleague's wedding and learning to sleep in a different name had compressed into a threshold that, in that moment, would not permit another year of waiting. This was the misjudgment. Not catastrophic, not immediately visible as a misjudgment, but a decision made by the accumulated weight of the cover rather than by the operational logic of the moment. Hussein started moving again. The false release came at the gate. At approximately 8 meters from the southern gate's narrowest channel, Rami passed through a momentary thinning in the crowd, a lateral gap created by a family with a stroller cutting across the flow. For approximately 6 seconds, the compression eased. Bodies spread slightly. Movement became partially chosen rather than crowd-determined. In those 6 seconds, Hussein was clearly visible, not obscured, not compressed against him. Standing in partial open space, moving at his own pace, 3 meters ahead. For 6 seconds, it was possible, physically, spatially possible, to simply not proceed, to let the gap exist, to let the crowd thin a little more and Hussein move a little further ahead and the geometry of the operation dissolve naturally, without an abort signal, without a failure on record, into the simple fact of circumstance. The operational psychologist had flagged this in training. Years earlier, during a different exercise, the false release moment, when execution becomes optional, is more dangerous than any other point in the operation, because it creates the illusion of choice where no sustainable choice exists. The gap closed, the crowd surged. The compression at the southern gate reached its maximum density. What happened in the 6 meters before the gate took less than 4 seconds. Yosef was in position. The crowd density matched the modeled parameters within acceptable variance. The noise level, 200,000 people in post-prayer dispersal, greeting each other, calling children, moving through a bottleneck in the morning heat, was exactly what the model had predicted. The contact was made. It was not loud, it was not visible. In a compression zone of that density, directed force is indistinguishable from crowd pressure, and the crowd pressure at the southern gate of a 200,000-person prayer gathering is absolute. Hussein moved through the gate with the crowd. Rami moved through the gate with the crowd. Yosef moved through the gate with the crowd. 22 meters past the gate, in a secondary street where the crowd was beginning to thin and separate into residential directions, Hussein's pace changed, then stopped. Rami was already 40 meters away, moving at the pace of the dispersing crowd, not running, not looking back. He did not look back. He had been told not to look back, not for operational security reasons, though those reasons existed, but because there is a specific instruction given to operatives after a terminal execution, an instruction that sounds almost administrative until you understand what it is actually protecting against. Do not confirm, do not witness. Move. He moved. Behind him, in the thinning crowd, on a secondary street in Karachi on the morning of Eid Al-Fitr, someone noticed. Not an ISI officer, not a security operative, an old man, heavyset, standing near the gate perimeter, who had come back for the 3rd year, who had watched Yosef enter the compression zone, who was now watching the secondary street, who was not moving. Yosef's exit from the prayer ground took 62 seconds. He had mapped 3 separate exit routes during the 19 days prior, each with a different vehicle waiting at a different distance, each booked through a different identity layer. The primary route, a walk of 400 meters to a parked car on a residential street, was clean. The car was there. The driver was a local asset who had been told only that he was transporting a foreign businessman to the airport for an early departure. The driver did not ask questions. He had been paid not to ask questions. This was a normal arrangement in Karachi, for reasons that had nothing to do with intelligence operations. Yosef was at the airport within 40 minutes. What he did not know, what he could not have known, because his sight line at the gate had been forward, not lateral, was that the retired officer had noted the vehicle plate. Not the full plate. The last 3 characters, and the make and color of the car. This is the kind of detail that sounds insignificant until you understand the city it was recorded in. Karachi's ISI informant infrastructure was not a centralized system. It was a network of retired officers, neighborhood contacts, and institutional memory that operated through personal relationships rather than formal channels. A partial plate, in the right hands, in the right neighborhood, could move through that network in hours. The retired officer went home. He made tea. He sat with what he had seen for a long time before he decided what to do with it. Dr. Karim Hussein was found in the secondary street at approximately 9:15 a.m. by a man walking home from the prayer who initially assumed he had fainted from the heat. By the time a doctor arrived, there was nothing to reverse. By the time any official notification reached anyone, Hussein had been dead for 40 minutes. The cause of death recorded on the initial medical report was cardiac arrest. Hussein had a documented heart condition, real, not fabricated, which had appeared in his medical records for 6 years. The attending physician saw nothing inconsistent with that history. A man in his mid-50s, a pre-existing cardiac condition, a massive public gathering in the Karachi heat. It was a tragedy, but it was an explicable tragedy. No second examination was requested. No investigation was opened. His family was notified before noon. His colleagues at the Technical Institute were informed that afternoon. The institute director issued a brief statement about his contributions to Pakistani academic life. His Canadian-based daughter flew home within 48 hours for the burial. The ISI unit that had previously reviewed and closed the file on Faris Haddad, the Lebanese textile buyer who had attended the 2001 Eid prayer, received no notification that anything unusual had occurred at the 2003 prayer. There was no unusual occurrence on record. A man with a heart condition had died on a hot morning in a crowd of 200,000 people. The operation had no official existence. And yet, 3 days after the burial, the retired officer called a former colleague, not through any official channel. A personal call, to a personal number, the kind of call two men make who have known each other for 30 years and trust each other in the way that exists only between people who have shared the specific experience of working in rooms where nothing is written down. He described what he had seen, not as a report, as a conversation. He described the man whose body moved like an operative in 2001, the different face in 2002 with the same movement pattern, the positioning near the southern gate in 2003, the vehicle, partial plate, make, color. His former colleague listened without interrupting. At the end, the colleague said Hussein had a heart condition. The retired officer said, "Yes." There was a silence. The colleague said, "I'll look at it." He looked at it. The partial plate led nowhere definitive. The vehicle had been rented through a third-party local company using documentation that was technically valid, but originated from a supply chain no one wanted to fully trace. The rental company's records were incomplete in ways that were locally unremarkable, but analytically frustrating. The colleague filed a note. Internal, informal. It said, in summary, cannot exclude external involvement, cannot establish it, recommend no further action absent additional evidence. The note went into a file. The file went onto a shelf. It was not nothing. It was not enough. The AQCon network's public exposure came 14 months after the Karachi operation, in late 2003, when a ship carrying centrifuge components bound for Libya was intercepted. The international dismantling of the network, Khan's confession, Libya's disarmament, the cascade of diplomatic pressure across Europe and Asia produced a landscape of accountability that was, by any measure, radically incomplete. The buyers were identified. Some of the middlemen were identified. Khan himself was placed under house arrest in Pakistan, shielded from any international prosecution by a government that could not afford what full accountability would reveal. The technical validators, the physicists, the consultants, the men who had made the science work, were almost entirely never named. In the years following the network's exposure, Western intelligence services produced their own internal assessments of what the network had actually transferred, and to whom, and with what degree of scientific competence. Those assessments were classified. The publicly available conclusions were deliberately vague about the degree of technical expertise that had supported the network's most sensitive transactions. Dr. Karim Hussein appeared in none of those public assessments. He appeared in none of the prosecutions. He appeared in none of the diplomatic negotiations that followed. He had died of cardiac arrest on Eid Al-Fitr, 2003. He was not a public figure. He was not a name the world had ever learned. Whether his death materially slowed the proliferation of centrifuge validation expertise to state-level buyers, whether the new buyer referenced in the 2002 intercept fragment ever received what they were seeking through another channel, is not answerable from any public record. Operations are not equations. You do not always know what the answer would have been if you had not intervened. You know what happened. You do not know what didn't. Rami was debriefed over 4 days in a European city whose name is not part of this account. The debrief was thorough. The operational assessment was filed as successful. His performance was rated as effective under non-standard conditions. The crowd stop, the compressed approach, the false release moment were all documented and analyzed. The debrief noted that his in-field decision-making had deviated from the operational model at 2 points, and that both deviations had not compromised the outcome. Lev signed off on the assessment. The operational psychologist who had raised the abort discussion filed a separate note, not part of the official record. She wrote, "Subject displays no acute post-operational distress. He is cooperative, articulate, and functionally stable. I am concerned about none of those things. I am concerned about his fluency. He is too comfortable narrating Faris Haddad's history in the present tense. When asked about his own history, his own name, his own past, he takes a half-second longer to access it than he does to access the cover. That half-second is not nothing." Rami was given a new identity, new city, new assignment, a desk role, analytical, low exposure. The Lebanon cover was retired, the Dubai cover was retired. Faris Haddad was, in official terms, dissolved. Omar, the colleague from the Dubai textile company, the man whose wedding Faris had attended, whose wife had recently had a child, sent a message to Faris's phone number 3 weeks after the operation concluded. A casual message, the kind friends send. The number had already been disconnected. Omar would have assumed Faris had changed his number, or moved on, or simply drifted away in the way that professional contacts sometimes do. There was nothing suspicious about a disconnected number. People disconnect numbers every day. He would not know that the man he had worked beside for over a year had never existed. He would not know that the man who had attended his wedding, who had argued about Egyptian cotton, who had remembered the name of his wife's sister, had been a construction, a legend, an instrument built for a purpose that had nothing to do with fabric or friendship or any of the ordinary things two people build between them when they occupy the same professional world for long enough. He would simply think that Faris had moved on. And in a way that is more accurate than it sounds, he would be right. There is a principle in intelligence work, not written in any doctrine, but passed between case officers in the specific way that institutional knowledge travels, which is quietly, over years, through the testimony of people who have made costly decisions, that states, the most dangerous cover is the one that works completely. A cover that fails is recoverable. You burn it, you extract the operative, you rebuild. A cover that succeeds completely, that becomes real to the operative, that builds real relationships and real emotional residue and real identity, that cover does not end when the operation ends. It ends when the person ends, and sometimes not even then. Rami ate breakfast in Tel Aviv every morning as a man whose name he was still deciding whether to believe. The operation that had taken 3 years to build and 4 seconds to complete had left no public trace, no official record, and no acknowledged outcome. It had also left no intact version of the person who had carried it. That is the cost that never appears in the operational assessment, not because it is hidden, but because there is no column for it, no metric that captures what a man loses when he has been someone else so completely and for so long that coming back requires a journey for which no one has ever drawn a map. This has been Hidden Ops. If this documentary reached you, share it with someone who thinks espionage is about action. It isn't. It's about the weight of what you carry before you ever reach the moment everyone wants to see. Subscribe. We'll be back.